Jake Miller had lived alone for 2 years in a small apartment near his university. Life was simple for him. He went to classes in the morning, worked part-time in the campus library, and came home to a quiet space filled with books, old coffee mugs, and a single dying plant near the window. He liked peace. He liked silence. He didn't expect that his life would change forever on a rainy Thursday afternoon. That day, he received an email from the student housing department. It said he had been selected to host a foreign exchange student from a special interplanetary cultural program. Jake thought it was some kind of prank. Earth had only recently joined the galactic community, and normal people didn't usually meet aliens. He clicked the message twice to make sure it wasn't spam. But it was official. It even had the university seal and a message from the planetary exchange office. His new roommate would arrive in 2 days. Jake wasn't sure how to feel. He cleaned the apartment, something he hadn't done in months. He threw out empty snack boxes, wiped the counter, and tried to make the small place look less like the room of a tired college student and more like a welcoming home. He even bought an extra blanket, unsure if aliens felt cold. 2 days later, there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, he froze. A tall young woman stood outside. Her hair shimmered like silver threads, and her eyes glowed softly in shades of violet. She carried 3 smooth metallic cubes that floated in the air beside her, and a small crystal device hung around her neck. Her clothes were simple but strange pale fabric that looked like liquid glass. For a second, Jake forgot to breathe. "Hello," she said carefully, her voice calm but uncertain. "I am Lyra of Alari. I am." "Your new roommate?" Jake blinked, then laughed nervously. Yeah. Hi, I'm Jake. Welcome to Earth. And, my apartment." Lyra stepped inside, looking around with open wonder. She touched the light switch and gasped softly when the bulb flicked on. "Instant illumination," she said. "No external crystal needed." She pressed her palm against the wall. Solid, rough texture. Fascinating. Jake wasn't sure if he should laugh or apologize for the old paint. "Yeah, it's, standard Earth wall stuff," he said awkwardly. She smiled. "I will study this wall stuff. It seems important to human architecture." He realized then that this was going to be a long semester. That evening, Jake tried to explain the basics of human life. He showed her how to use the microwave, how to open the fridge, how to switch the television on. Lyra watched everything closely, her head tilting slightly each time something new appeared. When he explained that food could be delivered just by using an app, she frowned. Humans depend on machines to feed themselves. Jake shrugged. "Yeah, pretty much. It's faster." "Efficiency is logical," she said, then paused. "But it feels lonely." That made Jake stop for a moment. He'd never thought about it that way. Lyra's species, the Alari, were known for their precision and emotional control. They used implants to manage mood, and every action followed reason. She had come to Earth to study unregulated emotional behavior. Her mission was simple: live like a human and record her observations for the Alari Council. But for Lyra, this was more than research. It was her first chance to feel without control, to live freely, and maybe to understand what made humans unique. Over the next few days, she explored every corner of the apartment. She poked at the toaster until it burned bread. She asked Jake if the shower was a mini waterfall device. She tried to greet neighbors by speaking through the building's intercom, announcing, "This is Lyra. I come in peace," which caused 2 people to call the landlord in panic. Jake couldn't stop laughing. She didn't seem embarrassed, only curious. "Humans fear what they do not expect," she said thoughtfully. When she tried to cook dinner for the first time, she created a glowing blue paste that smelled like metal. "This is nutrient gel," she explained proudly. "Balanced proteins, carbohydrates, minerals." Jake took one cautious sniff and shook his head. "Yeah, we don't eat glowing food, but it is perfectly nutritious. Maybe for your kind. For us, it looks radioactive." Lyra blinked in confusion, then smiled. "Then I will learn your methods." So they made spaghetti instead. She burned the first batch, undercooked the second, and finally got it right on the third try. When Jake said, "This tastes good," she stared at the steaming plate like it was a miracle. "Humans find happiness in flavor," she asked. "Yeah," Jake said between bites. "We really do." As the days passed, Lyra's questions became deeper. She wanted to know why humans smiled when they were sad, why they said "I'm fine" when they weren't, why they laughed at pain, and why they sang songs about heartbreak. Jake tried to answer, but sometimes he couldn't. He just said, "It's complicated." One evening, Lyra found him watching an old movie, black and white romance from the 1950s. The actors cried and hugged in the rain. Lyra sat beside him, her eyes wide. "They are in distress," she said. "Why are they smiling?" "They're happy," Jake said softly. "They found each other again, but they are crying." "Sometimes happiness makes us cry too." Lyra frowned, confused. "How can one emotion create its opposite?" Jake smiled gently. "That's being human." She looked at the screen again, then at him. "Then I wish to learn this feeling." Lyra began writing in her glowing notebook every night. She recorded everything: smells, sounds, colors, emotions. Her sentences were precise. Day 7. Human humor detected. Jake dropped a cup and laughed instead of expressing anger. Hypothesis: laughter reduces tension. Sometimes Jake peeked at her notes and couldn't help laughing. "You make me sound like a science project," he said. She looked serious. "You are a fascinating specimen of humanity. Thanks." "I think—" But behind her calm words, Jake saw warmth growing in her eyes. She was changing slowly, gently, becoming more human every day. One afternoon, Lyra decided to explore the city alone. Jake worried but let her go. A few hours later, she returned wearing a baseball cap and holding a bag of fast food. "I have interacted with local vendors," she said proudly. "They offered me free fries when I smiled." Jake laughed. "Yeah, that's how it works. You smile, people respond." She nodded thoughtfully. Smiling is a universal signal of peace. That night, she told him she wanted to experience a human social event. So Jake invited her to a small student gathering. Lyra wore a bright yellow jacket, too big for her, and brought a small container of glowing dust, calling it Ilari incense. When she entered the room, everyone stared. Some whispered, others smiled politely. But Lyra didn't notice. She walked up to people, extended her hand, and said, "I am Lyra. I wish to share emotions." It was awkward at first, but soon her honesty broke the ice. People asked her questions about her planet. She listened with patience and even laughed when someone joked about glowing eyes. By the end of the night, she was sitting on the floor with a group of students, telling stories about Ilari skies filled with floating gardens. Jake watched from across the room, proud and amazed. She wasn't just learning about humanity, she was living it. Late that night, as they walked home under the streetlights, Lyra said quietly, "Your people are not as different as we thought. You seek connection. You fear loneliness. You find meaning in small moments." Jake nodded. "That's pretty much life here." She looked up at the sky, where the stars glimmered faintly. "On Ilari, we see stars only through data screens. We study them, but do not feel them. Here, I feel." Jake smiled. "Welcome to humanity, Lyra." The next morning, she woke up early and made breakfast. It was still messy, with half-burned pancakes and too much syrup, but it was edible. Jake grinned as he ate. "You're improving." Lyra sat across from him, hands folded neatly. "Every day I learn a new word, a new sound, a new feeling. I begin to understand why your species is unpredictable." "Because we're messy?" "Because you live," she said softly. Jake didn't know how to reply to that. He just smiled, and she smiled back, her first real, natural smile. That evening, as the sun set, Lyra stood by the window. "When I return to my world, I must present my findings. But I think the most important discovery is not in my data." Jake asked. She looked at him, her violet eyes gentle. "It is the warmth of being seen. On Ilari, no one truly looks at another. Here, you do. And that changes everything." Jake felt something stir inside him. Respect, admiration, maybe even pride. For the first time, He saw humanity from another world's eyes, and it humbled him. Outside, the city lights glowed like stars fallen to earth. Inside, an alien girl and a human boy sat quietly, sharing dinner in silence to beings from different worlds, learning together what it meant to be alive, and for Lyra, it was just the beginning. The following week, Lyra's fascination with human life deepened. She had mastered the basics of living on Earth, eating, sleeping, bathing, but she wanted to understand the subtler sides of humanity, emotions, social interactions, and the unpredictable moments that made humans so human. Jake noticed how attentive she had become. She no longer asked the same questions about everyday objects, but instead questioned his reactions. When he laughed at a joke, she would tilt her head and ask, "Why do humans enjoy humor that is not logical?" When he frowned at a confusing lecture, she noted confusion is often followed by vocal expressions of frustration. One bright Saturday morning, Jake and Lyra decided to explore the city park. It was filled with children playing, couples walking, hand in hand, and people jogging or reading on benches. Lyra watched silently, absorbing everything: the laughter of children, the barking of dogs, the rhythm of humans moving in no particular order, but still in harmony. Humans find contentment in simple actions. They do not need perfection to experience joy. Jake smiled. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes the small things matter more than the big ones. Lyra carefully documented everything in her notebook, her violet eyes scanning every detail. She paused to observe a group of teenagers flying kites. They derive satisfaction from controlling an object affected by unpredictable forces, she noted. Curious. Jake laughed. You sound like a scientist watching humans as experiments. I am, she admitted. But I am also learning to participate, not just observe. Lyra wanted to engage. She tried to fly a kite herself, but it twisted and twirled, eventually crashing into a bush. Instead of frustration, she laughed, a soft melodic sound that echoed around the park. Jake noticed it was the first time she truly displayed human emotion, without filtering it through reason. You're smiling differently now, Jake said. That's real. Lyra tilted her head, considering his words. Perhaps this is what you mean by living. I feel satisfaction in unpredictability. The next challenge came in the form of social gatherings. Jake's university hosted weekly student meets, casual spaces where people mingled, shared snacks, and discussed various topics. Lyra wanted to join, but she had never participated in group discussions before. When they arrived, she hesitated at the entrance. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of cups. Lyra's posture stiffened as she scanned the crowd. How do humans navigate such an environment without chaos? She whispered. You just talk, Jake said simply. You join a group, ask questions, listen, and respond naturally. No rules required. Lyra nodded, although uncertainty lingered in her glowing eyes. She approached a cluster of students discussing an upcoming art exhibition. Her voice was soft, deliberate. I am Lyra. I wish to understand human creativity. The students stared for a moment, caught off guard by her formal tone. Then, curiosity replaced hesitation. They welcomed her warmly, explaining different art forms, sharing stories of failed projects, and laughing at mistakes. Lyra listened, asked thoughtful questions, and eventually shared her own experiences on Alari. Describing visual simulations and floating gardens that changed with emotions, her stories fascinated the students. One of them, a young painter named Mia, asked, Do your emotions affect your creations? Lyra nodded. Yes, but we regulate them. Here I am learning to let them flow freely. By the end of the evening, Lyra was laughing more naturally, her voice rising and falling with the group's rhythm. Jake watched proudly. She was learning to navigate human unpredictability, not just as a student, but as a participant. Lyra's learning, however, was not always easy. Not everyone was kind. A few students whispered about her unusual appearance and glowing eyes. Some made jokes she didn't understand. She felt isolated for the first time. One afternoon, she sat in their apartment, staring at her notebook. Jake, humans sometimes reject what they do not understand, she said quietly. Jake sat beside her. Yeah, they do. But that doesn't mean you're wrong or strange. It just means some people haven't learned yet. Lyra tilted her head. Then I must find those who will accept me. I wish to understand human empathy, not judgment. Jake smiled. You're learning the hardest part, to keep trying even when it's difficult. That's human courage. The next opportunity to explore human emotion came unexpectedly. Jake volunteered at a local children's shelter, and Lyra insisted on joining. At first, she was hesitant, unsure how to interact with young humans. But the moment a child approached her shyly, Lyra's instincts to observe shifted into participation. She knelt, spoke softly, and listened. The children shared stories, played games, and even laughed at her odd movements. Lyra realized that empathy was more than observing behavior. It was feeling alongside another, offering comfort without expectation. One boy tripped and scraped his knee. Lyra gently placed her hand near his wound, not touching, just presence, and whispered, "It will heal." The boy's tears stopped, and he smiled faintly. Your species. It is capable of kindness without reason, she said later to Jake. That's humans. Jake replied simply. Over the following weeks, Lyra began trying other human customs. She celebrated birthdays, complete with candles, gifts, and clumsy attempts at blowing them out. She tried singing along to popular songs, often singing slightly off-key, but with enthusiasm. She learned the meaning of sarcasm, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, and wrote letters of gratitude to friends she had met. Her attempts were often awkward, yet genuine. Jake found himself smiling at every small success, seeing how someone from another world could adapt so quickly, yet remain wonderfully unique. One evening, Lyra attempted her first human joke. She approached Jake cautiously. Why did the human cross the roadway? She asked, trying to imitate a common joke she had observed online. Jake grinned. Why? To reach the place of higher nutritional satisfaction. Jake laughed, nearly spilling his water. Close enough. That's the spirit. Lyra made a note in her notebook. Humor is effective even when inaccurate. Humans respond positively to attempts at connection. Despite progress, challenges remained. Lyra had never experienced disappointment, jealousy, or fear in the way humans did. One night, a group project at university went poorly. Lyra had worked hard, but her teammates ignored her suggestions. She felt a wave of frustration, confusion, and sadness. Jake noticed her silence and gently asked, "Want to talk about it?" Lyra hesitated, then admitted softly, "Humans sometimes fail to recognize effort. Feel an emotion that is difficult to define." Sounds like disappointment, Jake said. It's normal. Even humans feel it often. The important part is how you respond. Lyra considered this. Then I must practice resilience as humans do. The next day, she returned to the project with renewed energy. She suggested a new approach, simplified ideas, and encouraged her teammates. By the end of the week, their project succeeded. Lyra noted in her journal, disappointment can motivate improvement. Emotional turbulence has functional value. Jake smiled. You're learning fast, she smiled back. Not just as Lyra the observer, but Lyra the participant. Lyra also explored human creativity. She tried drawing, painting, and writing short stories. At first, her works were precise, almost mechanical. But gradually, she infused them with unpredictability. Colors clashing, lines bending, characters making mistakes. She was experimenting with imperfection, and in doing so, she discovered joy. One night, she showed Jake a drawing of the park they had visited. The kites twisted and danced in strange, impossible ways. The colors shimmered with emotion rather than accuracy. Jake stared at it. It's beautiful, he said. It is not precise, Lyra said, frowning slightly. But I feel it is more human. Jake nodded. That's exactly it. Humans make mistakes, but that's part of the art, part of life. By the end of the month, Lyra had begun noticing patterns in human behavior, but she had also learned exceptions. People were unpredictable, messy, and sometimes illogical, yet their actions were often guided by emotion, care, and a desire to connect. She found herself laughing at jokes, offering comfort without thought, and even feeling excitement when plans succeeded. One evening, she sat on the rooftop with Jake, watching the city lights flicker like stars. "I have discovered something unexpected," she said softly. "What's that?" Jake asked. "Humans are not perfect. They are not logical in every moment. But this imperfection allows them to experience life fully. Fear, joy, sadness, hope, these are not weaknesses. They are strength." Jake looked at her impressed. "That's a big realization." Lyra nodded. "I had expected to teach others about humans. Now, I am learning more than I imagined. Perhaps this is the true purpose of observation, to change oneself." Lyra's confidence grew, but so did her awareness of limitations. She still did not fully understand why humans acted against reason, why they forgave so icily, or why they persisted despite failure. Each day brought new questions. Each day brought new small victories. Jake realized that her journey was far from complete, but he felt privileged to witness it. Together, they had shared meals, laughter, failure, and growth. Lyra had begun to experience what it meant to be human, and in turn, Jake had gained a new perspective on his own life. Their friendship deepened. Lyra no longer viewed him only as a guide or experiment subject. He had become a partner in exploration, a bridge between two worlds. Lyra awoke to a soft chime from her communication device. Her violet eyes blinked rapidly as she read the message from the Alari Council. It was short and direct. "Return immediately. Emotional instability detected. Your observation period is terminated." She felt a strange tension in her chest, a sensation that her species called stress. But she had only recently begun to understand. She looked at Jake, who was still asleep, his face relaxed in morning light. "This is urgent," she murmured to herself. "But I do not wish to abandon this learning." She packed her floating suitcases silently, weighing her duty against her newfound understanding of humanity. On one hand, she had a responsibility to her people. On the other, she had discovered warmth, connection, and the unpredictable joy of human life. Jake entered the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," he said. "You look serious." Lyra hesitated. "Jake, I've received a transmission from Alari. They demand my immediate return. Emotional state is considered unstable." Jake frowned. "Unstable? You've been learning, not failing." "I have learned more than I anticipated," Lyra said softly. "They do not understand my development. I must decide whether to obey or to continue here." Jake thought carefully. Sometimes the right choice is not the easiest one. But whatever you decide, you have already done something extraordinary. You've learned to care. Truly care in ways your people might never understand. Lyra nodded, grateful for his words. She had indeed learned care, empathy, courage, human strengths that were difficult to measure, but easy to feel. Later that morning, she made a decision. Before departing, she wanted to fully experience what humans did when they faced hardship, when they helped others without expectation, and when they connected despite fear or doubt. Jake suggested they visit a local hospital that welcomed volunteers. Lyra agreed, curious to see empathy in action. As they entered the brightly lit hallways, she was met with a mixture of beeping machines, soft voices, and the scent of antiseptic. Children, some with bandages and casts, played quietly under the watchful eyes of nurses and volunteers. Lyra observed the environment closely. "Humans provide comfort despite personal inconvenience," she noted. "This behavior seems illogical, yet it produces significant emotional impact." She followed Jake as he helped a young girl arrange blocks. "Would you like to try?" he asked. Lyra hesitated. Her fingers had never touched toys designed for unpredictable play. Slowly, she knelt beside the girl. The child smiled shyly and handed her a block. Lyra placed it carefully, and when it toppled, she laughed softly, a genuine, unguarded laugh. The girl giggled in response. Lyra felt a new emotion, satisfaction that stemmed not from achievement, but from participation. She realized that human empathy was not measured by perfection, but by intent and presence. Hours passed. Lyra assisted children, comforted parents, and listened to stories of courage and resilience. She noticed small gestures: a nurse brushing hair from a child's eyes, a volunteer holding a frightened hand, a parent offering quiet words of reassurance. "This is remarkable," she whispered to Jake during a brief pause. "Humans express care without expectation of reward. This strengthens society beyond logical calculation. That's the beauty of it. You care because it matters, not because someone tells you to." Lyra watched a young boy, recovering from surgery, laugh as another child performed a silly dance. The joy in the boy's eyes was unplanned, spontaneous, and contagious. Lyra felt a stirring in her chest, an emotional resonance she could not define, yet recognized as meaningful. She realized that humans thrived not only through reason but through emotional connection. They found strength in vulnerability, courage in support, purpose in love and friendship. Later, when they returned to the apartment, Lyra received another message from the Alari Council. They demanded her immediate return, warning of consequences if she failed to comply. The tone was cold and commanding, devoid of warmth or understanding. Lyra stood at the window, staring at the city below. She felt a conflict deeper than she had ever experienced. On one side was duty, logic, and her people's expectation. On the other was empathy, experience, and the understanding that humans offered, a form of intelligence not measured by data, but by heart. Jake joined her silently. "You have learned something they cannot measure," he said. "Empathy, courage, the choice to act with care. That is human power." Lyra turned to him, her eyes shimmering. "Then I must choose not by command, but by understanding." The next day, Lyra prepared a final experiment, one that would test everything she had learned. A local park had scheduled a community cleanup, and she insisted on participating, armed with gloves, bags, and determination. She joined groups of humans picking up litter, planting flowers, and organizing supplies. At first, her movements were precise, almost mechanical. She picked up trash, placing it neatly into bags. But as she continued, she observed more than objects. She noticed effort, cooperation, and shared laughter. When a bag ripped, she helped another volunteer without complaint. When someone dropped seeds, she encouraged them instead of correcting the mistake. By the end of the day, the park was transformed. Lyra realized that human strength lay not only in efficiency, but in collaboration, patience, and kindness. Her observations were no longer purely analytical. They were heartfelt. Jake approached her as they sat on a bench, exhausted but satisfied. "You did well," he said. "Not as a visitor, but as part of the community." Lyra smiled, her glow softening. "I have learned that caring without expectation is not weakness. It is strength." Jake nodded. "Exactly. That's what humans value most. You understand now." Lyra looked at him, then at the children playing nearby. "I wish to preserve this understanding, to bring it back to Alari, not as data, but as experience. To show that connection and empathy are as vital as reason." Jake smiled. "Then you're ready." The final challenge came when the Alari Council contacted her one last time. They dispatched a retrieval vessel to bring her home. The craft hovered above the city, silent and imposing. Lyra faced a choice: obey and return immediately, or stay long enough to complete her emotional experiment and share her understanding. She took a deep breath. "Jake, I will go," she said, "but not without demonstrating what I have learned." Together, they approached the retrieval area. Lyra stepped forward, addressing the council through her device. "I have observed humans," she said, her voice steady. "I have learned that emotional connection, empathy, and shared effort are essential to societal strength. My people may measure logic and efficiency, but understanding emotion completes the picture. I request permission to return home with these findings." For a moment, silence. Then the council responded, unusually thoughtful. "You have demonstrated growth beyond expectation. Your mission is complete. Return at your discretion." Lyra exhaled, relief mixing with pride. She had fulfilled her duty, yet retained the knowledge she had gained. She had bridged two worlds, Earth and Alari, through understanding, empathy, and courage as they prepared to leave. Lyra turned to Jake. "You have taught me the most vital lesson. To care even when it is difficult. To act with intent beyond command, and to embrace the unpredictability of life." "Shh," Jake smiled. "And you've reminded me why we are human. Not because we are perfect, but because we try, care, and keep going no matter what." They exchanged a quiet nod, a silent understanding between two beings from different worlds. Lyra stepped onto the retrieval vessel, her suitcases floating beside her, the city lights below like scattered stars, before departing. She left Jake with a small device, a compact translation and observation recorder. "Use this to share human empathy with others," she said. "Teach, observe, and connect. That is the greatest power of your species." Jake accepted it, feeling the weight and responsibility of her gift. "I will," he promised. The vessel lifted into the sky. Lyra gazed down at the city one last time. She thought of children, volunteers, neighbors, and friends, all displaying the unpredictable beauty of human life. She had learned that courage, kindness, and empathy were not weaknesses but the true markers of strength. On Alari, she would share these lessons. Her people would see that logic alone could not define a species. Emotional connection, compassion, understanding were just as powerful, sometimes more so. And for Jake, life returned to normal, quiet, simple, and familiar, yet richer than before. He had witnessed someone from another world embrace humanity, and in doing so, had rediscovered its power himself. Months later, he watched a broadcast from Alari. Lyra addressed her people with warmth and clarity. She shared stories of cooperation, laughter, resilience, and empathy, lessons she had learned from humans. The council, once skeptical, now applauded her insights. She had become a bridge, proof that humanity's strength was not just in technology or logic, but in heart. Jake smiled. Humanity had won not a battle, but something far greater. Recognition from another world. And Lyra, the alien who came to observe, had become a symbol of hope for both her people and humans, showing that understanding. Kindness and connection transcended planets.